take inspiration from a lot of different sources. I've read a variety of different religions, a variety of different philosophies, and I try to embrace the good elements of each one and put stuff in there that'll be a signpost for other readers that recognize those signs. Most of the cultures that I mentioned are genuine cultures. A lot of them, things that I've actually talked with people about. Some of the things that happened in the Vietnam sections in the second book. Did anybody read the second one? Any of you guys fans of Apocalypse Now? Did you notice the similarities? What was the mission? Do you remember the mission that Colonel Kurtz was sent on that caused him all the trouble? Operation Archangel. What's the operation in my book? Operation Archangel. Okay, for copyright purposes, it was Colonel Curtis who sent them on the mission. But you look at it and then watch Apocalypse Now just for sport. Okay, but I take inspiration from a lot of different sources and I try and pepper them in throughout. So if you're seeing something that's like, wow, that's like something from a movie I've seen, odds are good that it is. Have any of you read the third book? Excellent. The character of Malcolm Detweiler. Any of you guys familiar with him? Just for fun, find the old film. It's a Jeff Goldblum movie, Mr. Frost. Just watch that for sport. Okay, you'll understand where Malcolm comes from after that. Okay. Anyone else have questions? Because I don't have a whole lot of free form. I could sit here and go on for hours if you like, but I can address directly if anybody's got anything they want to know. Oh, we got good tattoo stories too. I'm a tattooist and body piercer, so they can get a little out of hand, some of the stories that I tell from that. But what's that? Oh, God. I'm going to be putting out a book eventually. I don't know when it is. I'm working on it right now, but it's an insider's view of tattooing from the artist's perspective. The book is called Thick Skulls and Thin Skins. Okay, it's a description of a certain class of characters that we have come through the doors. We had a young lady come in. I work in Overland Park up in Lawrence, up by Kansas City. Kansas, excuse me. It's up by Kansas City. A woman came in one afternoon, and she's like, yeah, I want to get some kanji. So we're like, okay. Kanji is a form of Japanese writing. It's a symbolic writing form, ideoglyphic. So we're like, okay, what would you like written? Kanji. Ma'am, you understand kanji is a writing system? Yeah. So what would you like written in kanji? Well, I want kanji. Okay, so we went and found the kanji for kanji, and we put that on her. Like, all right, she was happy as can be, walked right out with it. Like, rock on, job well done. But you get that all the time with tattooing. Tattooing is a lot of fun in that capacity because everybody's got a different concept of what they want done, and you got to deal with them on a one-on-one. The hard part about it is you get people who think you're trying to be rude to them when you're just trying to not deliver the wrong tattoo. I had a guy come in one time. It was when I was working in Lawrence. He said, yeah, I need to get me one of them tattoos with a name on it. Okay, what name would you like? Well, it's a girl's name. Usually what that means is I've met someone down the street that I'm going to hook up with for the next few weeks, and I need to demonstrate to her that I'm in love with her. So would you put this on here, and then in a few weeks we'll cover that up. So, okay, great. So I draw the design up. It's a heart, got the name in it, done it fairly small, got some detailing around it. He looks at it and okay. He wasn't loving it. If they're not loving it, you probably shouldn't do the work. I was like, all right, didn't really want to mess with it because if they're getting the name of somebody like that, it's not his wife, okay, he's probably not going to like it anyway. So we do the tattoo, finished it all up. He's happy with it. He's pleased. His daughter comes in about a week and a half later. She's getting the work done, and I was like, yeah, your dad, he didn't seem to like the tattoo design. She's like, oh, well, he's kind of weird. That was for his girlfriend. I was like, oh, yeah, it's a memorial. Like, what happened? Well, he's a gunsmith, and they modified an AR-14, and she was the first one to test fire it down on the range at Topeka. She was out there, and she was in position, had it all set up, and when she fired, the receiver wall blew out, ejected the bullet into her chest, killed her, penetrated her heart immediately. And I was like, that was the wrong tattoo design. I told her, tell your dad, come back. We need to work that design again. So he comes back, like, yeah, she said that you want to change it. It's like, yeah, that's not the right design. He's like, what do you mean? It's like, that's for a girlfriend. This isn't for something that's going to sculpt you forever. It's like, all right, so what do we do? It's like, we're going to rework it. We went in, put another 4 hours into the thing to redo it, turned it into a completely different design, much better, covered up the original. He was just glowing when he left, but that was more like what we were looking for. And he's like, what do I owe you? It's like, that's what it should have been in the first place. It's no money on that. But that's kind of stuff that goes on with tattooing. You know, it's a lot more personal than most people think. You see the tattoo shows where it's like, oh, it's just clients blowing through. Well, you can do that. You can run it that way, but it's better if you actually get to know them. Some of the stuff that's in the stories, that's in the Paladin Sequence, is actually derived from people that I've worked with who have become characters within the stories, and also people that I've known over the years. For example, when I was back in college, going to school up at K-State, I was studying psychology up there. I actually studied a variety of different topics, but my main course of study was psychology. Along the side, I was studying various technology. I was studying anthropology. I was studying neuroscience, biology, biochemistry. And there was a class that was offered called History of Witchcraft and the Occult. Now, the professor is a man named Bob Linder. Bob Linder he had a theological doctorate from, I believe it was the seminary in St. Louis. It just so happened that he was actually attending the seminary at the time that Father Bowdern, the man that The Exorcist was written about, was actually there performing the exorcisms. Okay, so he was present when they actually performed the exorcisms on this boy. If you've seen the movie The Exorcist, they've got the girl named Reagan, all the stuff going on where she gets possessed. They go to different people. They take them to the doctors. Finally, they settle on the Catholics. It didn't quite go like that. The actual situation was a teenage boy. He was doing some really weird stuff. They were at first trying to claim that it was evidence of telekinesis because they said he was able to float. He wasn't floating. He was jumping on the bed. It was just the way they were taking the photographs, catch him at the right angle. There were some kids in the 70s did the same thing. It was a big expose on poltergeist they did where they're showing them. There's one picture of the girl in the air like this. They later admitted, yeah, they were just jumping. But he actually had recordings from what they did. If you watch modern movies about exorcism, they often say the Catholic Church forbids the recording of exorcism. Well, that's a bunch of crap. Okay? They record them because there's actually a case in Germany. If you read Gerald's background in the first book, there were 2 exorcists that performed exorcism over there. The exorcism of Emily Rose was based on this. I forget her name right now. But there was a young girl who had been seeing Fratzen, the faces of demons. So 2 German exorcists worked the case. They performed the exorcism on her, but through the course of it, they denied her food, and she wound up dying. They were found guilty or responsible in the case of her death. Now, it wasn't a criminal deal. They were pulled out of service to the laity, and they were cloistered after that. So it wasn't like they got sent to prison, but they did suffer for it. And since that time, the Catholic Church has been very, very big on we need records taken on what happens to these things so we are not liable for anything later. So Bob had copies of the recordings they made during the Bowdern exorcisms. They were really something. There's stuff going on there. He's like, wow, that's wild. So after he lets us hear all this, he then wants to know. He asks us, what do you think? Do you believe this is a legitimate case? We had a bunch of guys in class that are like, yeah, absolutely. That thing with the voices, like, no, that's not that difficult. So what do you mean? He's speaking tritone. That's not that big a deal. So what do you mean that's not that big a deal? There's a type of singing they do in the Alps which involves tritone. There's 2 sets of vocal cords that humans have in their throats. You got the higher set and you got the lower set. The lower set is usually used when you're yelling. It's a lower pitch, lower intensity. The higher one is used for quiet conversation. Yes? Oh, okay. Yeah, the upper ones are used for the more high-pitched type conversation. But if you can learn to fire both of them simultaneously, the 2 pitches overlap to create a third tone, producing the impact that there's 3 people speaking to you when there's only 1 person talking. It's really creepy to see somebody do it. But if you know that it's just a singing technique, it's really not all that impressive. The kid had figured it out on his own. So that's how he was getting the tritone thing going on with it. The jumping on the bed was the levitation. He also urinated copious volumes. Yeah, you can power load water and learn to urinate a good 1.5 gallons on that. That's not that big of a deal. The one thing that got me, he puked up shrimp. That was one of the deals. And in the first book, I comment about she was puking up weird things like the weird shrimp in it. They couldn't tell where the hell the kid got the shrimp. They were a Pacific strand. It was a species that lived in the Pacific Ocean, not in the Atlantic, and the kid was from the East Coast. So in class, one of the guys, oh yeah, they got that from a Chinese restaurant. I was like, couldn't be. Why? Because the date. What about the date? 1953. So you are aware of what we did to the Japanese and pretty much any other Asians during World War II, aren't you? No. Oh, okay. Basically, if we don't like the way you look, we're going to lock you up. Okay. Yeah, it was not a good thing, but they took Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, anybody that was Asian, basically, took them out of their businesses and locked them up in the deserts and the swamps. Okay, that's like a 30% kill in the populations that were there. It was not a good deal. And then they didn't get their businesses back when they came out. It wasn't until the late 50s and the 60s when they finally started to reestablish themselves. And nothing was ever mentioned of this. When I was in 2nd grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Francis. And she was the one who actually read us the book Journey to Topaz, which was I believe it was an autobiographical account of a young woman who went through that whole extraction process, sent to the deserts in, I think it was Utah. It was Utah or Idaho. And it was horrific reading about the whole thing. But because of that detention, there's no way that he could have gotten it from a Chinese restaurant. There weren't any Chinese restaurants at that time. They just weren't back. So in the end, we still determined he's clever. We don't know where he got the shrimp, but I don't believe it was legit. And of course, Bob agreed with us in that. Bob's like, yeah, we don't believe it was a legit case either. But there's a lot of instances like that. You'll read about all these different cases of possession, even trans-ecstatic possession. Some of the later books will be dealing with that. There's an anthropologist by the name of Felicitas Goodman, did a variety of books, Where the Spirits Ride the Wind, and there's another one called How About Demons. But they actually went in and did neurological analyses of individuals in the state of possession, or as the voodoo practitioners call it, the state of chevalier. Chevalier, of course, is derived from the term cavalier, which means one who rides. So when in the voodoo faith, you are actually carrying the loa, you are mounted by the loa, you are being ridden. And it's different, but there are real neurological changes that go on. The thing is, those neurological changes aren't necessarily unique. You see it in other cultures where there is the taking on of the personae of the other. I like to tie all of that into the story. Now, the possessions in my stories are very different. The demons that are taking, they're just these malicious, god-awful things. But if you've read them, you understand there is method to their madness. They're not just out there because they're nasty, evil creatures. They are still worshipers of God, some of them. Some of them don't believe in God anymore. As the story goes on, we'll find out. Some stuff happened in the 1940s that basically created this separation. And since that time, the Infernals and the Shadows have both been making their play. The Infernals may or may not be being manipulated, you'll find out, and the Shadows are the master manipulators. The Shadows are essentially what's left over when something which was once worshipped or believed in has died. Once all of the hatred and scorn has been heaped upon that which was, the shadow is what remains. It is an echo, a reverberation that has a real life force, a real energy, and it uses that energy to insinuate itself to try to silence all things. The shadow simply wants peace, and the best way to peace is extermination of all life and energy. That will, of course, create an infinite expanse of brownness, basically the same thing that happens out when the state of entropy maximizes itself in a given universe. So that's what we're looking at. Yes, I do combine crazy elements of physics in with it, but I got the background for it, and I try and keep the stuff consistent. There are some elements that are completely made up. If you're good with physics, you'll have picked up on some of them. I'm not sure if it's actually written in the books. I don't recall if it's in there. I've told these stories over the course of years. So when I'm trying to recall, I've got hundreds of individual events of verbally telling the tales. So it's like, oh yeah, this part. People are like, that's not in the story. It's like, did I leave that out? Oh boy, we better put that in a different portion. There's a part where they're talking about how the demons were able to communicate with Jacob, Matthew's father. I say that they were using phase electron pulses, electrons of a differential charge. And that's how they were doing it. By altering the charge slightly as he received the signal, he was able to work out something very much akin to Morse code. Now, any of you good with physics here and realize why that's a bunch of crap? Electrons are defined by their charge. Change the charge, you change the particle. It's not an electron anymore. I've had people who are like, you don't know this. Like, no, I do know that, and that's the bit of fiction. That's how I use that to detect people who are idiots who want to come and say, oh, I loved your story, and the demons are real. Like, no, they're not. This is fiction. Okay? I've never encountered these creatures. I don't imagine you could actually summon one of them. I don't imagine they'd show up. Now, do concepts, hyper-psychological concepts such as this exist? Sure, we create them all the time. One could conceivably be possessed by the spirit of Darth Vader, but I don't think any of us here would say, oh yeah, Darth Vader's really out there somewhere. Probably not, unless you subscribe to multiverse theory, in which case, yes, he exists in an infinite number of universes, but they're not likely to cross paths with here. Maybe, but I wouldn't count on it. Theoretical physics goes into it as well, and that stuff's getting dismissed left and right. I don't know if you guys have seen the stuff about the CERN, the super collider they got going on. There's some people who are asserting that we're now living in an alternate reality where Donald Trump was elected president. It's like, no, he's the president. It's not an alternate reality. That's just what's going on with it now. You don't jump from universe to universe, and if you do, you're not aware of the fact that you've jumped. They keep bringing up the things about, what was it, the Berenstain Bears or the Bernstein Bears? Yeah, that's one of the things. It's like, okay, so you've got bad memory for spelling, and all of a sudden you think you came from an alternate reality? I think not. Then the ones who are on about Nelson Mandela. Well, I remember Nelson Mandela dying before he became the president. He died in prison. It's like, no, he didn't die in prison, but there were rumors of that going on back in the early 80s. That's probably what they recall. The trouble is memory systems are so fallible that people will recall something completely different years later than it actually occurred. Second grade, I remember getting into a discussion with a couple of my friends. They were talking about, it was the platypus, actually. Now, I didn't know the name of the creature back then. I'd read a comic book. It was actually a Walt Disney comic, I think. Was it Disney? It's one of the Daffy Ducks, so it would have been Warner Brothers. But Daffy Duck met his cousin. They called it an Australian duck. If I'd have just asked my grandma, she'd have told me what it was. She was stationed in Australia in World War II. But we'll get into that in some of the later books because some of her stories are actually in there. But the teacher's asking, we don't know what this thing is. It's got like a tail like a beaver and all this. I'm like, it's an Australian duck. It's like, well, it's an Australian duck. I've heard of it called that, but I don't know what it's called. So a couple of my friends, oh, yeah. And I was, no, it's a real animal. I was like, no, oh, yeah, oh, crap, it's real. Yeah, it's probably down in South America flying around with the dodo birds. Actually, the dodo bird was a flightless bird and it wasn't in South America. It was from the Dodo Islands. Oh, yeah, right. They didn't even believe it. So I'm like, great, bring the teacher in, right? First grade, you get the authority of the teacher. And this is where I learned to distrust authority. This is Blackburn. These guys are trying to say dodo birds aren't real. They are, aren't they? I don't know, are they? Hell yes, they are. God, are you a moron? Okay, yeah, that didn't go over well. First grade teachers do not take well to that sort of vocabulary. Years later, I'm having the discussion with Bobby Stewart about this. I was like, yeah, I remember that. You jackasses coming after me about dodo birds. Oh, yeah, you didn't believe they were real. Really, if that's the case, then why do I have this whole stack of drawings when I was 3 and 4 years old, where I used to draw the damn things obsessively out of my grandmother's World Book Encyclopedia, Volume 6? I have semi-photographic memory. So when people do this sort of thing, it's like, all right, let's run the facts, shall we? You have no idea how many times it's happened where people have this recall of something that's like, you're wrong. You're completely wrong. And then I've got to go back, draw it out, and say, this is true, this is true, this is true. You admit that? Yes. Then how could this be true? Oh, well, you've tricked me. Oh, yes, that's right. Yes, I'm the trickster. It just strikes me as funny how people forget things and how they would apply some sort of crazy miracle of technology to explain it rather than, I have bad memory. No, we're universe jumpers. It's like Sliders made real. I don't think so. Yeah, you guys remember Sliders?
Loved it.
Great TV series. Love that one. Even when they got to Sci-Fi Channel later. Anything you want to hear about? Or, yes?
What inspired you to go from just writing to publishing?
I had no idea how to publish. I'm a tattooist, and people come in and say, wow, it must be great. You guys get paid so much. We don't get paid. Okay? We earn. We don't get money unless we're actually working. So there's very little free time. You know, I'll put in 10 or 14 hours in the shop in a night and then get home. But I tell these stories in the course of it. And I had so many people that liked them. They didn't want to come and spend $600 to get a tattoo just to listen to the story. It's an expensive novel that way. So it was better if I could actually get it on paper. Then I could actually relay it to other people, get the information out. Yeah, he's the one. You should see this guy with his shirt off. Yeah. But, you know, all the clients liked it. Now, the funny thing, we hear a lot of people about the story. They're like, it's just like Supernatural. Okay, I started telling this story probably around 2004, 2005. That's when I started working on the Paladin Sequence. And Supernatural began right around that time. But I had some elements of it that came before that. Like Ironblood as a character, I had him worked out a little bit before that. It was right after I saw Full Metal. So whatever year that showed on Cartoon Channel, we could backtrack and check facts. So I'm talking about the photographic memory, but I have trouble with letters, or numbers, excuse me. Letters I'm fine with. Numbers, like, whatever, they kind of jumble in my brain. Dysnumeria, I believe is what they call it. Okay, but I still remember the numbers. I just can't put them in the right sequence. Like there's a 7, there's a 6, there's a 3, there's a 2, and there's a 4. Well, yes, but what's the order? Hell if I know. Yeah, it's great for combinations too. And banked cards. Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah, it's one of these. Yeah, okay, can you just give me the stuff? That doesn't work out very well. But I was convinced that Eric Kripke, one of the guys that actually worked on Supernatural, had to have gotten a tattoo in our shop because some of the story elements that he brought into that series was like, he couldn't have gotten that. That's something extrapolated. Now, of course, after the fact, I'm looking back, it's like, well, odds are a reasonably intelligent person reading that could draw the same conclusion, put it together. And there are enough points of variance where the stuff goes on. You know, I get people all the time, does it make you mad? Do you hate the TV series? No, I love the show. I want to be Dean when I grow up. I tell people that all the time. There's like, you're like 20 years older than him. Yeah, I know. But I still want to be him. That doesn't change a damn thing. Now, I heard Jared's kind of a jerk, but other than that, I hear they're all right. I've not met any of them, so I don't know anything about it. But I love the show. It wasn't really inspiration to get stuff published. I had no idea how to get published. I've been a writer since I was a kid. Write stories, always have. I've been a comic book reader since I was very young. My uncle had a collection of comics that went back to the 1960s, 1950s. My Uncle Dick actually was the first of the comic collectors in the family. He had stuff, oh God, we had X-Men #1 through like X-Men 30. We had Silver Surfer #1. That was actually my Uncle Danny's. He had a comic called Not Brand Ek. Any of you guys familiar with that one? It was a Marvel parody comic, but it has to be pronounced correctly because if you see it on the cover, it's Not Brand, E-C-C-H-H, exclamation, exclamation. But it's pronounced Not Brand Ek because the old commercials, here we have Brand X and Not Brand X. Understanding that, the comic's quite funny. They've tried to bring it around since then. It's a character named Forbush Man. You may have seen him. Red long underwear, blue bath towel, frying pan on his head, saucepan, I guess, with eye holes cut. That was pretty good. But having read literally decades worth of comics, I have learned to tell a story that carries on over years. There's stuff they do in these comics, like in the X-Men and the Avengers. There'll be a little thing that happens, like say back in 1978. Then somebody in 1985 will come around, take that tiny little thing that didn't mean anything, and say, oh, well, this is the start of this adventure that happened with this character over here. And they can just tie it in. The Paladin Sequence has a lot of that going on. I will apply personalities into archetypes as I meet the people to try and build a character. And if I meet somebody who's interesting with it, I'll pull as much out of them as I can to try and fill that character out. And there are certain characters in there that are definitely taken from some of my clients and from friends and family members. I had people laughing because there was a character in the second book that I named him Daniel McBride. Everybody's like, oh, Danny McBride. I didn't even know the guy's name. I didn't even know about that comedian. I'm like, really? God, that was a bad choice. He's actually based on my friend Ron McBride, but I didn't want to use Ron's name because he's just crazy enough he'd come and sue me for it. So I was like, well, all right, then we'll go with Daniel. Then it turned out to be even funnier because people are visualizing the comedian as the one who's doing all of that. And as it turns out, Danny McBride's a hell of an actor. I like the guy. So, but I didn't make an active choice to get published. Scott was interested in doing it. He looked into it. I didn't have the time to look into it. I was like, I'd love to do self-publishing. The 2 or 3 times that I did, we went about it wrong. We went to publishers like, well, what would have to happen? Well, you'd have to pay us about $30,000 and we could print you 100 copies. I was like, okay, yeah, here's the left one. Not interested in that one. Yeah, it just didn't, it wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't. So I just kind of sat on it, just went with it for a little while. Beyond Paladin, I've got a whole lot of other stories. I've got a whole story. It's about superhumans called Paragon. That one starts out seeming like a superhero story, but as you find out, it actually ties more into issues of cosmic balance like the Paladin Sequence does. Now, part of this, about the global sweeping religious element, you can blame my grandmother. Okay? My grandmother, Louise Parkinson, was just an amazing woman. She was a nurse. She was trained back in Philadelphia prior to World War II. Then she went and served as an actual nurse in World War II. People go on about, oh, she was a whack, she was a wave. No, she wasn't. She was regular Army. And if you call her a whack or a wave, she will smack you. Okay? She takes that as a grave insult. She's like, no, I wasn't. I was Army. I was an Army nurse. She served with cannibals there in the Philippines and in New Guinea. She was actually stationed on some of the islands there in New Guinea. She tells a great story about that. So the first night they landed there, they land them out on the island, they get out there, they bivouac on the sand, they got all their tents set up, got everything going. The next day, all the guards are out there because they were warned, there are cannibals in this place. So the guards are out there with their weapons, checking everything out, and the natives come out. They come out of the bushes, and they don't look like the natives on the National Geographic shows now. They learn to dress up for the National Geographic people. These guys got monkey tails wrapped around their heads, they got all these bird feathers on them, they're painted up with all this. They come out of the jungles, and they're like, who are you people? They had a dictionary, actually, the Talk Pigeon Dictionary. The Army gave these out so you could learn to speak the pigeon language. It's a combination of New Guinean and English. My grandma still has that copy. She's 103 years old right now, and she still has the copy of that book. I read it when I was a kid. But they come out and it's like, who are you people and what are you doing here? It's like, well, we're the Americans. Come here because we're fighting the Japanese. So the Japanese, we've heard of these people. They're dangerous. You're very lucky you landed on this side of the island. If you landed on the other side, there are cannibals over there. They will kill you. They will eat you without a thought. So they're like, wow, we are very lucky. So they set up their camp. They had the Army hospital going on. Everything was great. It was working wonderful. Then the Coral Sea Initiative hit. When Coral Sea happened, the Japanese made a big push. Okay, we pushed back. But they had to move from the side of the island they were on to the other side of the island, which sounds suspiciously like a Gilligan's Island episode. So they moved to the other side of the island. And once again, they're terrified because now we're in the land of the cannibals. So they're out on the beach, the guys with the guns are out there, and sure enough, the next day, the natives come out of the hills. As they come out of the hills, they're dressed differently. These guys are dressed in lizard skins. They like reptiles and birds. They don't like monkeys. They come out and it's like, who are you people and why are you here? It's like, we're the Americans. We're here fighting the Japanese. Yes, we've heard of the Japanese. You're very lucky you landed on this side of the island. The ones on the other side of the island are animals. They would have killed you and eaten you without a thought. As it turns out, both sides were accusing the other of cannibalism. Now, the truth, they were probably eating each other up in the hills. But down around the people with guns, they wouldn't dare do that because they knew what guns were. There's none of this thunderstick crap. They knew what a gun was. They weren't going to mess with anybody like that. But she has great stories. There's another one. Told them about the snakes. You're familiar with the snakes around New Guinea? Australia's got some of the most deadly snakes you'll ever find, and snakes can swim. So, a lot of them in New Guinea as well. So grandma was always worried. She had she saved this parachuter. They got this guy that was he was an airborne, and he brought his silk with him. He had a chute, and he was getting sent home, so he didn't need a chute anymore. Well, the chutes were actually very valuable for mosquito nets. You hang those things up over you, the mosquitoes can't get through it. So she had one of those silk parachutes hung up over her bed. She's there in her cot, sleeping and everything. She gets up in the morning, sweeps her feet down over, puts her feet on the, it's a thatch mat they had down there, and she feels it move. Oh, God. Pulls her leg up. She's sure it's a snake. She yells for the MP, get in here, because the MPs didn't dare go in the nurses' tents. Okay, so he comes in there, he's got his weapon. What is it? What is it? There, it's a snake, it's a snake. Levels it, bam, bam, bam. They hit it, the thing comes flipping out. It's not a snake, it's a centipede that long. Yeah, she was damn lucky, because you know what centipedes do when they get stepped on? They have the same sort of retraction that a rattlesnake does, the same sort of reflex action. They'll come around, they use their front limbs and the mandibles to latch on, and they inject a dissolving venom that actually starts to eat up your tissue. Believe it or not, their venom is actually extremely useful in killing cancer cells. Apparently, cancer cells have absolutely no tolerance for it whatsoever, but they're finding venoms are extremely useful in wiping out all sorts of unusual cell classes. But that's just another one of the fun stories that Grandma tells. My granddad, he was a nutritionist, and he was a hog farmer. One of the smartest guys I've ever known, but he would also get stuff. People are always like, you talked about these things like this crazy chemistry, this crazy physics. Yeah, you should have hung out with Grandpa around Christmas. Oh, it was great around the Thanksgiving table. We'd all be sitting there. My Uncle Dan would come up with some craziness, and my Uncle Bo would come up with stuff. My Uncle Bo is a lot like the character Angel Eyes from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Have you ever seen that film? I can't remember the actor's name right now who plays him, but he was also in Escape from New York. I believe that he played Hulk. He was the one who's actually running New York Command. But my uncle looks just like him now that he's an older guy, and he also still collects those old guns, the Dragoons and stuff like that. But we would get into the craziest conversations. It'd come down to physics. We'd have friends that come over to visit, like, we don't have conversations like this around the dinner table. It's like, yeah, well, we do, so get used to it and give me that chicken. But it was a lot of fun. Yeah, just different sources for different things. I grew up with a lot of different people. I hung out with kids that were oil riggers, that were mechanics. Oh, God, I could tell you stories. Well, I'm going to break that, aren't I? I could tell you stories about the horrors that we did when we were young. We were young thieves. We'd steal hay bales and scoop grain, get that to buy our beer when we were very young. Out in western Kansas, there wasn't much regulation. This was back in the 80s, so it was a different time.
What would you say to someone who's never read any of your books? I mean,
Run fast.
how would you like? How would you describe some of the stuff?
That's a really difficult one. I've told people before that it's religious horror. That's probably the best way that I could describe it, because each book takes a slightly different path to get where it's going. I tell them that I try and base it in reality. I try and put as much as I can in there so you can have foundations of real science, real hard physics, but look for the areas that aren't real, because they're there, and once you find them, there's usually jokes coded around where they get into it. But it's really hard to describe it. I tell them that it's horror. I tell them if you have a religious mindset or are interested in religious truths, you may well find the story interesting because there's certain arguments that take place. If you read the third book, the discussion between Paladin and Lucas Sabbat about the nature of God and the secret four-letter name of God, that's a lovely discussion, and I've blown some people's minds with that one. Back when I was in college, we'd get into discussions. I'll play devil's advocate with anybody. I'm a hard scientist. I believe in genetics. I believe in evolution. I believe in all these things. A lot of people don't. They'll be like, oh, I see no evidence of evolution. It's like, the fossil record. Well, no, I believe God created everything. That is not exclusive of what we're talking about. Evolution doesn't talk about how things started. Evolution talks about how things change. We do not speculate on the initial because we have not yet found the first life form. Once we find fossils of it or evidence of it, then we might be able to make some conclusions, but there's no way to tell what the first one is. If it's actually a cosmic deal, a cosmic seeding, it would be something from space that landed here, so all we would see would be the first life forms on the planet. Still tells us nothing about where they came from. But to hear people sit and try and argue it is like, you can actually witness evolution at work. I've never seen it. Speciation in the Galapagos Islands, if you'd like to have a look at that. Speciation in microbial species is a lot more easy to look at because you can witness that in the course of about 45 minutes because the generations alter within about 3 to 4 generations of each other. But I like to tie all of that in, and I believe that is actually part of the religious thought of many of these older cultures. If you go in and look at the coding, if you will, of the language they use, translating it out of the Aramaic or out of the Greek into the Latin language, then into another language before it reaches into the Germanic, there are so many points of error that could be introduced there. People often ask me, so what do you think about modern religion? It's like, well, it's a third-rate interpretation of a second-rate, or a third-rate interpretation of a second-rate translation of a first-rate idea. The conceptuals that are in the early scriptures of Christianity are solid, but they get changed and politicized as they go. They add things into it so they can deal with political problems rather than human problems. And that's one of the biggest problems we've got with religion now. They started using it as a tool to try and shut down intellectual curiosity. I don't believe that any creator would want to shut that down. I know if I were creating life forms out there, I would be tickled pink if they would figure out, hey, that's the guy. He's the one that did this. Why did you do that to us? And then, of course, I would be held to account for it. I don't imagine our creator would be any different. When you actually go back and look, in a lot of the Christian texts, they go through and say the man was made in the image of the mind of the creator. They don't translate that accurately. They say, oh, man was made in the image of God. That's not what that says. There's another part where it goes on, I am what I am. No, no, no. The translation is, I am what I am becoming. That is literally what that translation means. But because the person who was translating it from the original Aramaic didn't get that subtlety, now we got people, I am what I am. It's like, then you're Popeye. Okay? Because that's Popeye's shtick. Okay? And I'm not going to pray to Popeye, sorry. But I like to bring stuff from different philosophical perspectives to analyze. I don't think anything is sacred and off limits to inquiry. And fiction is a tool by which we can explore these things without getting ourselves shot by the lunatics that are out there. Yes?
You just don't have anything to do with books. Where are you at on Nostradamus? I probably don't pronounce the name. Nostradamus?
Nostradamus.
Yeah, no.
Yes. The seer, the soothsayer.
And the writing that he did.
Yes. In order to explain that, you got to get into some pretty crazy physics. Are you familiar with the principles of entanglement? This gets into quantum mechanics, and this is actually stuff that's been demonstrated. When you break physical particles that we know of them down, the ones we know of, protons, electrons, neutrons, all that, you can break them down into certain particles. And if these particles are taken and put into a fluidic state, that is accelerated to plasma. You're familiar with the 5 states of matter? Most people know solid, liquid, gas. Excellent. There's also Bose-Einstein condensate and plasma. Okay, Bose-Einstein condensate is what happens when you cool the system down to near absolute zero or below. At that point, molecular motion ceases. All of the components of those molecules glom together into a single superatom and function that way. You can literally stop photons when they go through it. It's going to be the foundation of computer systems of the future. Plasma, of course, is not what you find in the TVs. Okay, plasma is the state when the energy has been excited to such a great level that the atoms are now free-flowing. The particles have been released from it into a fluid which has equal charge going throughout at different points. Okay? Now, when you take matter and put it into that plasma state, then cool it back down, they recoalesce. But from that point forward, they are now entangled. Because their particles have mingled with one another, they now exchange information faster than the speed of light. So if you take one of those particles and keep it here, shoot the other one way the hell over to Alpha Centauri, whatever happens to the one in Alpha Centauri will be mirrored in this one. Bell's theorem was the experiment they did where they first started the tests on this. It gives you a means to check things. Now, if we buy that the entire universe began as a single event and the multiverse exploded from that, all the different iterations of universal existence that come from it, and the physics do dictate, I'll cover that here in just a moment, how that occurs. But if we accept that that is true, then all of the many universes originated from a single universal state. At that single universal state, when it was created, it must have been at an accelerated energy state for the explosion, which means all particles are entangled. If all particles are entangled, all particles are exchanging information at a subatomic level. So, if you have an iteration in a nearby universe, which is similar to our own, and there are many that won't be, because each diversion, each time that you get a path that can go off, it gets further and further away. But imagine each probability line as a spiral, which is wound into itself like a fibril, and they vary off. Information from a nearby universe can go into the iteration in this universe. So it is entirely possible for an individual to get those signals from another place. Now, can we ever prove it? No. No. It's absolutely unprovable. What's up? Yes. But in that instance,
It was about the writings and predictions.
yes. Yes, because Nostradamus' mind would be linked with the Nostradamus who is living in the future reality of it, or who is seeing that reality. Remember, the time stream that we exist within varies from universe to universe. The progression of technology may alter. So you could have an iteration in a reality which is far in advance of ours, but our reality will follow that. There is a possibility he may have gotten that. Now, there are many quatrains which Nostradamus wrote which have no validity whatsoever. No one's ever been able to find anything that links. There are others which have a sneakiness to them. Do I actually believe that Nostradamus was a prophet? Nah, not really. He was clever. He had some neat stuff. He had some good stuff in there. But I have seen the same quatrains interpreted to describe a dozen different historical events. Each time a new evil leader comes up, there's, oh, that's the Antichrist that he spoke of. You know, like the fire in the new city when he's speaking of that. Oh, the new city must be New York. It's like, well, maybe the new city isn't New York. Maybe the new city is Sacramento. Maybe the new city is going to be somewhere in Canada. Often the interpreter demonstrates the egocentrism of the person who is reading it. Predicting futures very often has to do with that, like tarot card reading. Tarot card reading, if you're going to do that, I do tarot card reading for people, it's not a psychic event. Those cards are loaded with images that key in people's minds. For example, the hanged man. There's a certain notion of that. There's certain elements of it. What do you think of? What do you think of a hanged man? Man in suspension, lack of movement, stagnation. Yes, that's what the card means. It's obvious. So when that card comes down, that's going to key something in my mind. And as I start talking to that person, their eyes will light up if I say something that's close to them. This is how hucksters work. Okay? They read your physical cues to try to keep going off of it and make you believe that they're telling you a truth. Okay? I know that when I'm laying those cards down, I don't have any psychic powers. I'm not getting visits from the future or from demons or God or anything like that. I'm reading their psychology and trying to predict their behaviors based upon their reactions to the symbols on those cards. I believe Nostradamus did something very much like that. Now, granted, he was using the scrying disc. He had the mirror that you look in, and you will find that that is a common practice amongst people that do predictions of the future. They often will have a reflecting disc of some sort. This goes back to old practices of I wouldn't go so far back as to say like what was her name, the Oracle at Delphi. She had a different thing going on. She was breathing toxic gases that were coming up, and that'd make her go. But some of them, they would sit in isolated rooms. They would take certain restricted herbs, and on that diet, they would see things. Well, if the restricted herbs you're taking are, say, Jimson weed and, let's say some other good psychedelics out there, say throw a little peyote cactus in on top of that, yes, you're going to see some very vivid imagery. Yes, and odds are if you write it down, you may have something that someone's going to pick up as that's a prophecy from the future. Were they really prophesizing? It's hard to say. But that is another field that I've looked into extensively is psychotropics, plants of that sort. When I was studying anthropology at the university, I studied under Harold Prins. He's a Danish professor, and he actually studied under Albert Hoffman, excuse me. There's a book called Plants of the Gods that's all about psychotropic plants and their uses in religious culture. And in that, they talk about the experience of taking these psychotropics to communicate telepathically. When LSD was first isolated, people going, oh, that's a synthetic. Right, it's a synthetic that can also be isolated from the morning glory. Okay? Now, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, of course, but there is a way that you can get that out, and all it requires is really cold water. Big argument they used to make, well, there's no way that could have been done, because we knew the Aztec were making use of what they called oleoluqui. Oleoluqui is literally the morning glory flower. They're saying, well, the process of mixing or getting the mixed anhydride requires a knowledge of chemistry. It's like, are you saying the Aztec had no knowledge of chemistry? They used poison-tipped arrows. It's like, that's chemistry, is it not? Well, that's easier to figure out. Is it really? Venoms don't necessarily stay stable. They had to mix them with reaction agents to keep that as an effective thing for the field of battle. Well, when they were extracting the compounds, the key is to keep the temperature low. The mixed anhydride of LSD will break down if you go beyond, like, I think it's like 20 degrees, something like that. So you got to keep it held down like that. Well, people had paid attention to the fact that the Aztec had specific runners that would go up into the mountains, put blocks of ice on their shoulders, and run them back down to Tenochtitlan. Everybody's like, oh, that's just so the emperors could have their ice. That's ridiculous. They wouldn't devote that much resource to something just so the emperor could say, oh, look at my shaved ice, guys. I'm better than you. It obviously had some sort of a ritual function to set up those relay stations to protect those runners. If you injured one of them, you would answer to the gods. You would be taken before them on the altar. You ever seen the paintings they got down in South America and all the temple walls where they're blue? That blueness is actually one of the psychotropic compounds they'd use. When you'd get up there to be taken for sacrifice, one of the priests would get it right in your face. Blow it right in your face. You'd get on there, you'd start to trip. They'd lay you down on the shock mule. Once you're down on the shock mule, you're acutely aware as they take the dagger, carve your heart out. You are still alive when it's happening as they hold it up for the rest of them to see. Then your body's kicked down, sometimes decapitated. Did you ever see Apocalypto? The Mel Gibson film that everybody hated because he had some certain problems with the producers? Yeah, that movie is actually a really good movie and a really good representation of it. The jewelry in it's a bit excessive. They didn't really have that kind of cool stuff, but man, it looked good. But I was watching that with some people like, there's no way that many bodies. Like, that's actually a fairly small ritual. What? It's like, there were times they'd sacrifice 60,000 people over the course of a 3-day ceremony. How could they get that many? Well, if you can't pay your taxes, then you got to pay the gods something. Also, political terror was brought into at that point. But psychotropics were very important because with the psychotropics, you could actually see the gods. Now, there's something else going on with that. It's one of the little-known bits in anthropology. They found these containers down there in Mexico and Guatemala. They were cauldrons. They were actually carved out of, I believe it was basalt. They were carved out of basalt or obsidian. But they were these large cauldrons. The insides of them were highly polished. When these were first discovered, the way they were interpreting is like, oh, well, what this was, these were the cauldrons they used to boil the bones of the sacrificial victims. They boiled the bones and feed the meat to the other people. Then why didn't they just use a regular cauldron to do that? Why'd they make these? Well, ritual significance. I ain't buying it. There's nothing else significant about them, so what's the deal? Well, one day they were excavating at the foot of one of the pyramids. I want to say that it was at Chichen Itza, but some of the workers were down there. They were polishing up the inside, clearing the muck off of it. It was a foggy day, as often is down in the Yucatan. So with all that fog around there, one of the anthropologists walked in front of this thing, and a reflection of him projected up on the clouds, nearly 40 feet tall. They were parabolic mirrors. They were creating parabolic mirrors, and they would actually perform religious ritual. They would dress up in the costumes and dance in front of the mirrors. So behind the pyramid, they would project images of Huitzilopochtli, images of Tezcatlipoca engaging in warfare against each other. So if you're tripping on LSD, which they were, or psychedelic mushrooms, looking up at this, it would be very profound. The experience of seeing these cosmic figures up there swinging weapons at each other while you're tripping, it's like, whoa! And there's no explanation. Oh, look here, what's happening is you've actually got a dopamine reaction going on here. This is nothing more than a modification of your visual system and your auditory pathways. This will pass in about 16 hours. No, the gods are upon me and I see them up there. It was quite convincing, quite compelling. If you put on a good show, you'd be shocked what people will believe. And this was a good way to keep people in that philosophy. Now, let's not forget that the Aztec were absolutely brutal. Have you ever looked at the excavations at Gran Chaco? They have only recently, I actually just read the article last week, they've only recently been able to demonstrate that the people of, I believe, it's not the Navajo, because the Navajo are there and there's another Chaco people that used to occupy Gran Chaco, but they assert they are the actual lineal descendants of the original settlers in that area, and they have a matrilineal line. Everybody was like, well, no, they probably brought it from the Great Lakes region because the matrilineal line's up there. You're familiar with the Huron and the League of the Iroquois? The League of the Iroquois were also matrilineal. The power structure was kept within the females till it got altered later. The Gran Chaco culture, as it seems, had the same thing because they found ancient burials there. They've gone through, checked the ancient burials, run DNA analysis. They found out identical mitochondrial DNA amongst the male and female groups, which means we are dealing with grandmother, mother, grandson, granddaughter. It is a matrilineal line of descent. With that going on, that was in opposition to what was happening in the Valley of Mexico. In the Valley of Mexico, it was a patrilineal line of descent. The great god Quetzalcoatl was their leader. He was the one that had them go. Huitzilopochtli was actually more popular. He was a god of war there. But they started sending groups up further and further north to get more and more sacrifices. If they couldn't find the sacrifices they needed, they'd get them from the tribes that were further north. They found some DNA on one of the hearthstones up there. It was actually in a group of human excrement samples that were found there. The human DNA that was in the excrement sample was not the excretor. It was something that had been eaten. Okay? So it turned out that if you didn't give proper respect to the Aztec warriors that came up, they'd eat your children, crap them out on the hearth, and then walk away. Okay? That was politics back in the day. Now, you probably wouldn't have as much nonsense as we do in the modern era if we did that. It's like, all right, the winner is President Trump. The loser will be lunch. It'd be very different if we were all eating Hillary at the end of it all, wouldn't it? Yeah. Some wouldn't. Somebody's like, no way. By this point, she's probably fairly tough. But cannibalism is another thing I frequently joke about that make people think I'm insane. That's another one of those deals. There was a book that was put out, The Great White Myth, I think is what it was called, where they talked about the myth of cannibalism. Turns out that guy was completely wrong. Yeah, they were trying to say that, oh, in Indonesia and those areas, they don't really conduct cannibalism. Oh yeah, how'd Kuru get in there then? You familiar with Kuru? Kuru is a human variant of mad cow disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's. Creutzfeldt-Jakob's, it's a prion disorder. It's a prion disorder. Prions are a different type of life. They're basically a protein which restructures itself so that it can't carry an impulse properly. So if you get into your brain or your muscles, you start doing these cool dancey things. And after a while, I can't really think or anything at all. If you've ever seen cattle with it, it's really horrifying. Now here in the States, you'll never find an instance of it because if we ever do identify mad cow disease in our herds, all of our contracts with Japan disappear. So if ever mad cow does turn up, it's re-diagnosed as an undifferentiated substantia nigra disorder. Okay? But no, it's mad cow, it's in there. But the only way that you can get is by ingesting the nerve tissue of an infected individual. There are tribes in New Guinea where they have the human form of it, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's. Well, the only way you get is by eating the nervous system of an infected individual. That's not really a survivable thing. Okay? It's like, well, we ate his brain, he's doing great now. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. If you ate the brain, then he's dead. He's quite dead. But that disease exists, that disease is out there. You're probably wondering, how did it get into the cattle populations? Some of the geniuses back in the day thought, well, we need cheap protein, so why don't we take this junk meat from all these lambs that we've slaughtered, just grind up the brains and skulls and feed it to the cattle. It's extra protein. Capital idea. Hey, great, neat weapon you've discovered. Now, unfortunately, it's not that good of a weapon because it takes 6 or 7 years to kill you. So it's like, we're going to do the slow burn. As you conquer our country, we'll just watch you all die. Yeah, it's not a good military tactic, but it's fascinating when you actually look at the biology behind it. And once again, there's another bit of the evolution if you're looking for that. Yep. The funnest one. You guys familiar with Henrietta Lacks? I actually saw the book over there on the shelves, The Immortal Henrietta Lacks, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. She was a woman back in the, I believe it was the 1950s when she was diagnosed. She had a case of uterine cancer, and it was really bad. She went in, her gynecologist checked her out, and she had all these weird little bean-like deposits throughout the interior of her anatomy. They took samples of it, found out something interesting. Most people, you cut a sample out from their interior tissue, you set it on the counter, it dies. Hers didn't. Hers stayed alive. Even more, if you put them in a culture with other cells, hers would absorb and devour the other tissues. We refer to these cells as HeLa cells. Now, just for amusement's sake, HeLa is actually the Norse goddess of the underworld. All right, now that we know that, HeLa cells were found to be immortal, and I believe that they have a certain pluripotency to them. They can absorb certain genetic sequences in themselves, they can reiterate, and they don't have a natural lifespan. Most cells have a natural lifespan. There's these things at the ends of your DNA sequences called telomeres. Telomeric restriction is what gives our cells mortality. Cells can divide a certain number of times before the telomeres have all completely dropped off. Once that occurs, the genes begin to spread out, new errors get in, intron sequences then get introduced as actual coding sequences, abnormal cells develop, the organism dies of decrepitude. That's what they call it. But these cells that Henrietta Lacks had, they do not experience decrepitude. They do not experience age. They continue to reproduce over and over and over. So they use them. They started using them, and they've started processing them to make vaccines and all sorts of cells and treatments. Do you see the problem? It's a cancer cell. You're using that to make vaccines. You're putting cancer proteins into people's bodies. Do you know what that does? That triggers cancer. Now, check the cancer rates in the United States since the 1960s when they started using HeLa cells, and you will see a terrifying correlation that will never be revealed in the media. Okay? But, yeah, read that book. There's going to be a movie coming out. It's fascinating. And incidentally, Henrietta Lacks's family was paid nothing for the genetic material that was taken. That is the foundation of most of our vaccines. Most of the stuff that we use are this stuff taken from her proprietary tissue that she was given nothing for. But it's little stories like this that I like to throw in with Paladin, little bits. And you'll find some of the more unbelievable bits in there. Research them. Look them up. You'll be shocked at what actually went on. Because oftentimes people look at it as like, dude, I had no idea. I read the little bit you found. I found the rest of this. Yeah, really interesting, isn't it? But yeah, stuff like that's great. What we have there, the HeLa cells, that is a human genome. If you were to analyze that, that's human. Well, no matter what you say, genetically speaking, that's human. But it's a single-celled organism derived from a multi-celled organism. That is evolution. People make the mistake of thinking evolution is the development from a simple form to a complex form. It has nothing to do with complexity. It has to do with adaptation. What is best suited to adapt to that environment? If that means shuck the delusion of the great organism, become a single, now we shall survive. That's what evolution is actually about. It has nothing to do with the creation. It has to do with survival, with continuing to exist, which I guess goes back into creation because once everything gets wiped out, cellular remains are all that there is, they'll reiterate back up. I often have discussions with people, say, do you believe that's real? Do you think that there's actually advanced cultures here? Yeah, I think there were cultures here before humans were. Well, there's no evidence of them. Look at our technologies. The closer we get to green experience, the less of a footprint we live. The ancient Egyptians were about as far from a green culture as you can get, and they put pyramids of stone out there. Once we've got all of our stuff going, there will be nothing left behind because all of our stuff will be biodegradable. We'll break down. People, it looks like everything was just natural and organic here. The only thing that would be left would be those monuments of the cultures that died a long time ago because we just don't make them like that. Buildings that are made of stone and concrete, those are going to break down long before big old chunks of limestone will. They corrode and they break and they fracture. Now, if they start using lunar concrete, you guys ever read about any of that? Lunar soil, you can make concrete because the lower gravity, when it hardens up, it's got a broader crystalline matrix to it, so it can actually withstand a whole lot more seismic activity. We just don't know whether gravity will break it down or not. We haven't had the chance to do that, but that's one of the things we're talking about mining off the moon when they actually get colonies there. We get people all the time, we need to take care of our problems here on Earth before we go to space. If our problem here on Earth is being smashed by an asteroid, there's not going to be a chance to go to space to take care of other problems. That's why I'm a big supporter of space exploration also. I'm convinced they're going to find life on these other worlds. If you've ever read any of, what's his name, Hoagland's works, The Mountains of Mars, the Monuments of Mars, there is some fascinating stuff in that book. I got into a discussion with one of the astrophysics boys up at KU one time. I mentioned Hoagland's work. And he's like, well, I mean, that's all just a fraud. It's like, really, where do you get that? Well, I mean, you look at that picture and you see the more modern photographs. Like, you are aware the modern photograph they're talking about is not actually the Cydonia site. Well, yeah, that's a site that's like 23 miles southeast of the Cydonia site. The frame is actually still in there if you look at the satellite orbit. They removed the sites that were actually of the face monument on there. It's not the same monument. The structure they've got down there doesn't have the same proportions on it. Is it actually a face? I don't know, but somebody's definitely concerned with making sure that no one has evidence one way or the other. Why would they do that? Well, sometimes it's just better to see a population in conflict because that can get more funding. If you still got people, no, it is a face, others, no, it's not, definitive proof that it is not isn't necessarily definitive proof there was nothing there, but it's a strong argument that's like, well, there's no ruins to explore there. There's other features on Mars, though. In nature, you very rarely see T-intercepts, 90-degree angles. They don't occur. Quartz molecules will have it, salt molecules will have it, but not many others. There's a number of those in regions on Mars that do have T-intercepts that very much resemble the ruins that you find in Gran Chaco and in a few of the other areas of the desert Southwest. It truly does look like there's something constructed there, but whatever it is, it's been subject to years of erosion, literally thousands of years. There's also two interesting nuclear plumes that are on that look like there was some sort of a weapon detonated there. It's crazy. Either there was a volcanic event which released a similar thing that we just haven't seen on Earth, or somebody nuked two areas on Mars. It's hard to say which. What do I believe in it? I don't. I've not been there. Until I actually go and lay my eyes on it, I can't make a statement one way or another. But I can tell you what the possibilities as we understand them are. What would I stake it on? I wouldn't stake on either one at this point. But smart money lies on not making crazy claims. So smart money would say there was probably life there. Did it ever develop to the level of having pyramids and monuments? Without solid evidence, no. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. If you're going to be saying, yes, there were aliens there, then we better be seeing evidence of aliens, not just some interesting structural features. And we do get into that in the story, incidentally. In Book 12, we have some stuff dealing with an asteroid and a crater on Mars that matches perfectly the contours of that asteroid. But that'll be a little ways out still. The next book we got coming out, of course, is Book 4. When is that coming out? Is it May? We're hoping for May. We got it through the editor. I'm doing the re-editing process on it right now just to go through and make the alterations. We've also got book 5. That one's a good distance through. It's not quite finished yet. Book 4 is going to be dealing with skinwalkers. If you've been watching the stuff on online, the videos we've got, there's a little bit of information on there. Are you guys familiar with the skinwalkers? Okay, these things in my story, they're not quite like that. They're older. I think you're going to enjoy it. It's pretty much my favorite of them so far that I've done because I really had a lot of research into that. Yeah, basically, I gave you that copy of it because I'd taken the time to write it out. Me and my friends usually hang out. My buddy had gotten a girlfriend, so he wasn't around available to hang. So I was like, screw it, I'll just write. So for several months there, I was just writing late at night and got a few of them finished. People come and get tattoos done. I tell them the stories. Like, oh, well, now we're done with the tattoo. But what happens with Paladin? It's like, well, you'll have to come back and get another tattoo to find that out, or get one of your friends to come in. Either way, it's a moneymaker for me. Yeah. But Scott was interested, so I gave him the manuscripts that I had. He read them, and he liked them, so he started the whole ball running. Yeah, I don't make a lot of money as a tattooist. I guess I'm fairly good. I've been doing it for 25 years. Nobody's broken my hands yet. Maybe just because I'm terrifying. I don't know. But I've still been doing that. But I just don't make the money at it that would allow me to publish these things independently. But Scott was able to do the research, get the stuff taken care of to where we were able to get it going. We didn't have much luck with publishers at first. We sent it around trying to get them. They weren't interested, so we did the self-publication. And people liked it. People were like, okay, this is interesting. Well, we had a few haters. If you look at their reviews, there's a couple of them on there. Some of them make me laugh. Oh, yeah, Curtis is all right. Reading his review again, I kind of agree with some of the stuff he said in there. It's all right. He's got some valid points. The fellow with the glasses, I don't know what the hell he's on. Yeah, I don't know what it is. Was it iodine or something like that? This guy's going on, well, there was these errors in the times and the dates in the second book. The error was in the first book, not in the second book. It's like, don't condemn the second one, condemn the first, because there were certain problems with that because we didn't know what we were doing. We were putting it together, trying to get it out. And honestly, I think we got the wrong one when we tried to do it. I think we used one that had not had the complete edit. Yeah, because we grabbed the wrong file. And it just went that way, it couldn't be helped. But his argument was valid, but man, his insane rants about it was like, dude, just go back, try and give it a read again. Judge it on the merits, not upon your outrage. He couldn't do that. Yes?
Okay. First question is, so you said there were some errors in the first book.
Oh, yes.
You've gone back and you've
Yes, I had to go through and retype the whole thing.
Okay, so okay.
Yeah.
So someone who has read the first book republished.
Yes.
Go back and
There are some extra scenes. There's a little bit more with Charlene. We find out exactly what happened to Charlene. There's a few other bits that are in there just pertaining to the religion and to what was going on there at the Temple of Tlaloc.
Okay. And second question.
Yes.
Being not only a fan of the books, but also a subscriber to your YouTube channel.
Oh, yes.
So one, amazing artist. But two, I'm sure you've noticed the obvious similarities between yourself
Yes.
and the drawing that you did of one Gerald.
Oh, yes. Yes. Incidental. When I created Gerald, I still had hair. And I didn't grow facial hair at the time. Yeah, all the hair fell out. It don't grow at all. Yeah. I'm going to have fun going to a barber sometime. All right, just take it off the sides, leave it on the top.
So would you say that it's just very coincidental, or did you purposely put elements of yourself
In all my-
into one character? Or
In all of my characters. There's a little bit of me in each one of them because I can only interpret the way that I see things and how I know other people have told me what they think. The Gerald Ironblood character is actually loosely based on Professor Linder, who I mentioned earlier, my own grandfather, who I did mention a little bit, and he does have elements of myself in it as well. And then there's some other like superheroic type stuff in there. I've got a little bit of Nick Fury from the Avengers, a little bit of that in there. But I wanted to make sure that none of these characters are islands unto themselves. None of them are the know-all, do-all. Each of them has frailties. Each of them has weaknesses. And those weaknesses are what's going to bring him down. Gerald's weakness is his inability to surrender. He will never stop. He will never give up. It is that iron will that is his strength, but it is also his downfall because we are human. And we all reach the terminal point. And we will find out more about what happened at Totengard. After the events at Totengard, after they leave there, something has gotten into Captain Pendrake. Captain Pendrake makes very bad choices after this. And as they approach the death camp of Eisenstorm, we find out some really horrific stuff. We get into gypsy magic. We get into some Kabbalistic Hebraic magic at that point. All of those things are going to combine together to create a death golem, something truly horrifying, composed of the material that is present at the site of the death camp. Literally, the remains of the dead, the barbed wire, the concrete, the steel. And this thing is looking for anyone that has malice in their hearts. So it's going to get really good in that one. That's a flashback sequence that will come up later on. It may actually wind up being in Ironblood's war journals, but it may be something we include. There's backstory for all of these things. Just because it's not in the book doesn't mean that it hasn't been explored. And I'll tell these backstories to people all the time. There's all sorts of stuff about Fiona and Arthella, backstory on them, the warrior nuns from the second one. When you start to meet the other people, I think in book 3, we meet a few of the other ones there. We meet Sister Elise, and we meet Sabetha. Sabetha has quite a background. She's actually tied in with the storyline of Let Us Pray. Let Us Pray is the prequel to the Paladin Sequence. Let Us Pray actually begins with a character walking through the deserts. Man dressed... Right, it's not released yet. But he's walking through the deserts. He's dressed in all white robes. He's clearly troubled. He's clearly looking in bad shape as he's approaching the city of Judea. So he walks through the city gates. He goes in. He's looking for a very specific address as he walks through. He goes through the sectors of the city that are devoted primarily to the Greek civilization. He goes on around to the ghettos, the Jewish ghettos. And there he finds the wattle and daub architecture that he's looking for, the cheapest slums that are in the place. He walks up to the apartment that he's looking for and he knocks on the door. As the door opens, a woman, probably in her 40s, answers, looks up at him, and she fairly spits his name. Jesus, what took you so long? He's like, I'm sorry, I came as soon as I could. I was detained. The Romans, they have no sympathies. It doesn't matter. You're too late anyway. Then he's recovered. No, he has died. What? He has died. The fever became too much. He died last night. Where is he? He is not here. Then where? The Romans came for him this morning. He began to stink. The hygiene laws. They said they would spread disease. They took him. We have to get to him. We won't find him. No, we have to. We have to. There's still a chance. We can do something for him. No, there's nothing to be done. The Romans burned their dead. Once he's burned, there's nothing I can do. The Romans will not burn him. One of the merchants, he told me that we could use his sepulcher. His family has a place there. They've taken him there. But then we must go to the sepulcher. Why? I must see him before the sun sets. Why? Father told me that as long as I can see to him before the shadows fall, then he can rise again, unchanged. I don't understand how that would work. You don't need to understand. You simply have to have faith. Now tell me, where is he? The cemetery. So they go to the cemetery. They walk back through the city, the outskirts. They go to the place called Golgotha, the place of the skulls. There they enter through the gates. At the front gates, they, of course, run into the 2 guards. As they approach, they hear the guards going on. This bit's a little racy. Do we have kids in the shop? I don't think we do. All right, as they approach, they hear the 2 of them talking. The one of them is going on, just going on. It's like, no, I tell you it's true. Priapus says that if both of you scream at the moment of climax, it's better for each of you. The other fellow who's sitting there, he's just like, yeah, right. If you ever had this conversation with a young person who's talking about inappropriate stuff, you know exactly what this older guy is thinking. So as he sees the 2 approach, he's like, you, what are you doing out here? Jesus and Lazarus' sister, Mary Magdalene, they actually approach, and Jesus says, a friend of mine has been buried here. I've come to see him. It's like, 2 Christians coming to the cemetery at sunset? Did you bring your pick and shovel? If you know the Roman history, they accused the Christians of being grave diggers, or rather grave robbers, because the Christians would often meet in the catacombs and the sepulchres to stay away from any sort of hassles they were being given by the Romans that didn't care for Christianity as a religion. So these Roman centurions, Titus is the older one actually. Titus is like, did you bring your pick and shovel? Like, I need no pick and shovel. I have simply come to pay my respects. And I see, then you should be able to pay your respects tomorrow. He's like, as you may well know, I am a rabbi, and amongst my people, the rabbis must be back at the, God, I can't think of what the term is for it now, the temple. Yes, must be back at the temple before the sun sets on the Sabbath. So yes, I'm well aware of your traditions, Rabbi, and you should be well aware that the Sabbath begins tomorrow, not today. Before you attempt to deceive a Roman, you should understand the training that we go through in order to protect you all. At that point, Mary steps forward. Please, my friend, he's been traveling through the desert all day. His mind is addled from the heat. The man who's buried here, he's a brother to me, and he is as a brother to this man. We simply wish to pay our respects tonight before the sun sets. Rules are pretty solid on this, man. If I get caught letting you guys in here and something turns up broken or missing, I'm going to be the one that's going to hang for it. At that point, Crispus, the younger one, the vicious one with the curly hair and the aquiline nose, Captain, I'm going to the brothel on the other side of the cemetery as soon as my shift is over. I can watch them, make sure they don't take anything. It's no problem for me. All right, you have your escort. What are you waiting for? So Jesus and Mary go along with Crispus, and they walk through the cemetery. The first part of the cemetery, of course, is the Roman graves. The Romans, not unlike the Greeks, had a preoccupation with physical appearance. They would run casts of their faces and place busts of themselves on the tombstones where the ashes would be scattered. You go into the Greek sector. The Greek sector was much more direct in the busts and the statuary. Beyond that, the Thracian sector, the trusted horse soldiers employed by the Romans, their graves decorated with the saddles and the skulls of their faithful mounts mounted on the spears they wielded in life. At the back of the cemetery, where the undesirables are, were the sepulchres. And that is, of course, where the Jewish burials were. They arrive at the sepulchres. Jesus is looking, trying to find the right one. Crispus points it out to him. They approach it, and the stone has already been moved into position to block it. Jesus turns back and says, "You will help me roll away the stone. Any communication you need to do with him can be taken care of from out here." So Jesus shakes his head. He looks at the sky. The sun is dropping in the horizon. Still up, there's still light. Shadows have not fallen yet. There is still a chance. So he reaches out with his right hand, with all of his faith and all of his force. He calls, "Lazarus, come forth!" Nothing. Nothing at all. No reaction, no nothing. Crispus is looking at it like, Jesus shakes his head. Perhaps something was wrong. Perhaps I didn't do it right. Looks, the sun has dropped even further. The tiniest bit of copper now illuminates the sky, now shining red like a burnt offering on an altar. He reaches out again. "Lazarus, come forth!" Crispus says, "A bit louder. Perhaps he didn't hear you." Jesus turns and gives him a look that can melt through steel. Crispus backs off at that point and is staring at him, looking at him with that judging eye, and Mary knows what this means. She grabs Jesus by the robe and says, "Lord, the Romans have permission to arrest people on the condition of insanity. The hygiene laws allow him to do that. If he thinks you're mad, he can have you put away." Crispus is looking at him like, "So, you want to talk to the dead, do you?" She's like, his mind is addled. Walking in the desert's made him this way. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's trying to do something to help. "Please, we'll go now." Jesus shakes her off. "No! Father told me I could do this." The sun has just dropped below the horizon as he rises his hand towards the crimson red and calls out, "Lazarus, come forth!" Nothing. "I don't understand. I don't understand. Father said I could do this." Mary takes him. No, you need food. You need rest. We'll go back to my place. We'll rest. You'll sleep for the night. He's fine. Once he's rested, it'll be better. Crispus, yes, he'd better hope that he is. As they begin to walk away, they hear it, unmistakable in the cold night air, the sound of stone grating on stone. As they turn, in the rising moonlight, they see 4 dead white fingers on the edge of a stone that takes 4 men to move, pushing it effortlessly out of the way. It rises and comes forward towards them, its face still covered by the cloth, moving in a horrific fashion. As they watch, Mary recognizes it, the posture. It has to be him. It has to be her brother Lazarus. During the festival of Mithras, when they ran with the bulls, her brother Lazarus was caught, thrown in the air. His hip was broken. Even after Jesus touched him, the damage that was done was not healed. He always stands like that, and that is the stance of her brother. As she rushes forward, we get to see what's happening in the tomb. Inside the tomb, the returned man awakens. He's heard someone calling his voice outside, but he doesn't know who or where. He feels himself restrained, so he breaks through the restraints. In the darkness, he smells something that smells good. He frees himself as best he can and begins to crawl towards the only way out, towards the smell. He pushes the barrier out of the way and, still unable to see, stands, walking into the light. Mary runs forward. Brother, you live!" as she snatches the cloth away from his face and stares in horror at the eyes, which are no longer alive. The returned man looks at those gathered before him, the meat which has come here and woken him from his sleep. The woman cannot feed on her. She is as a sister to him, a true sister of his own blood. He will not feast on her flesh. The man in the robes, he is as a brother to him, in flesh and in spirit. But the Roman, he has no love of the Romans. He has no reason to care about the Romans. As he begins to crouch, preparing to feed on Crispus, Crispus realizes the danger. He lowers his pilot into a defensive posture, preparing to strike to defend himself. As the returned man springs upon him across the cemetery, Titus hears his young companion screaming at the top of his lungs. He smiles and says, "That's it, boy. Give her hell. Give her one for me." That's the prologue sequence of Let Us Pray. Yeah. From there, we move on to a storyline that takes place in Atlanta. There we're dealing with the priest by the name of Brother Lazarus. Brother Lazarus is basically a Pentecostal who has started a church down there, which is very, very popular. and he's been recruiting people. There's a young faith healer by the name of Bobby Marks, and Bobby's the real deal. Most people claim they're a faith healer. Oh, all they do is come up, smack you hard, and call it good. Rely on your adrenaline to make you walk around for a while. Then a few hours later, nobody else sees it when you fall back on your ass. Well, Bobby's the real deal. If he touches you, he can heal you. Physical, psychological, spiritual, it doesn't matter. His touch is truly the touch of healing. And this has not escaped Brother Lazarus' attention. Brother Lazarus has plans for Bobby. In fact, he has recruited him, if you will. Bobby wants to be a preacher when he grows up, wants to be a full-blown priest. His parents know this. Bobby's favorite evangelist is Brother Lazarus. Brother Lazarus has a contest. Put your name on a postcard and mail it in, and they'll draw those postcards out, and they'll select people who will be sent around the world to do the work of the Lord. You may wind up going to somewhere in the outback areas of Mexico, or maybe somewhere in Indonesia, or maybe somewhere in the depths of the African jungle, or one of any other number of godless locations where if something happens to you and you die, no one's going to ask for your body back because of the tropical diseases, the parasites, and everything else. Because whoever goes on these little retreats for Brother Lazarus never does come back. They instead go to Brother Lazarus' church where they feed he and his entourage. Sabetha is one of his kept pets of the entourage. The battle that goes on is described a little bit. God, it's trying to think of his name right now. There's so many names. He was the former alpha exorcist. He's the one that loses it. He's the one that Gerald goes to meet, who's totally freaking out. And I can't think of his name right now. It's just escaping me. Yes, Oliver Law. There's a conflict goes on between Oliver Law and Deacon Farrell. You'll read more about Deacon Farrell in the third book. I've had people ask me, so that Deacon Farrell, did you get that from outsiders? Like, nah, actually I stole that from Magic the Gathering years ago. Farrell Zealot. Yeah, you remember those from, I believe it was the one nobody liked. It was that series they put out that everybody hated. Fallen Empires. Yeah, everybody hated the Fallen Empire series. I used to kill people with those decks. Get in there, I'd be pulling phallas out on them, all sorts of stuff, because it's a really weird supplement they put out. But there was a character in there named Farrell who was a religious oppositionist. He was one of the white cards. But that was what inspired me to create Deacon Farrell. Then I took him back into history, created the Farrell line, linked with the legend of Josie Wales somewhat. So, yeah, I pull from all different sources to try and get stuff going. Are there any other questions on that?
I'm waiting. When is that?
I've got a lot of that actually written. We meet a lot of vampires in that story. And as you probably noted, my vampires aren't quite like the others. These are Nazarene vampires. In the storyline, there are distinctions. There are Nosferatu. Those are different. Those are shadows. Then there's Nazarene vampires. They're a combination of shadow and light. They got a little of each in them. Much like the Voodoo faith. The Voodoo faith also combines shadow and light together, and the shadows hate them. Shadows are purists. They can't stand hybrids. Same thing with the forces of light. Angels do not like hybrids. That's why they hate demons. That's why they really hate the Voodoo gods and the Yoruba deities.
So your vampires don't sparkle?
No, not unless you set them on fire. Set them on fire, they sparkle pretty good, actually. Somebody actually explained that to me. I was talking to somebody about that. I never read the Twilight books, but a friend of mine read them. He said, they're not bad. They're not bad. And I was like, sparkle pyres, come on, man. He's like, no. The thing about the sparkle pyres, the way that works, is they live there in Seattle, right? Seattle's got all the rain and all that. There's fog around all the time. So when the sun comes through it, the sun rays, the photons are actually broken up. So they're actually only being hit by a sprinkling of photons. And what you're seeing is the photonic reaction with their skin, making them seem to sparkle. I was like, oh, okay, that seems perfectly reasonable. Then my buddy Clayton says, yeah, what about the scenes when they're in Italy? They're in Italy? He's like, yeah, they're in Italy, and they sparkle there, too. Okay, argument falls. The guy's a dumbass. If I'd read them, I might be able to make a more critical evaluation of it, but I haven't read them yet. I'm interested. I'd like to check them out. You guys read The Goon by any chance? You ever seen that comic? There's an issue of The Goon that gets into this. You really got to see. The concept of sparkle pyres comes from that. The Goon's very funny. If you get online, there's a little short that's on there. There's a film they did. It was a little, what do you call it, an attraction deal to try and get money for it. It's hilarious. The Goon and Frankie. Goon's this big old monstrous dude, wears the cap. Oh, it's awesome. I don't have it memorized enough. If I'd have read it before I came in here, I'd have kicked it back up, but I haven't actually performed that one for about 4 years. I used to do it for people when they were in the shop when I'm tattooing them. I'd go through and do the scene for them, but I don't remember it now. But on the cover of The Goon sitting here, it's just his face is like, sparkling vampires? Are you, cuss words, killing me? Or are you kidding me is what he's saying, rather. You can't, of course, write obscenities on the cover of a comic book, so that's what they've got. Did you ever read Satan's Sodomy Baby? That was another issue of The Goon. Find that one. If you have a sense of humor, oh my God, you will die. On the front cover, it says, warning, this comic book is not acceptable for people who disapprove of They go through all this stuff: alcohol, drugs, abortion, let's see, paganism, devil worship, West Texas, what was it? West Texas Pentecostalism. There's a scene in it where one of the characters in it winds up getting impregnated by the devil. It's quite funny because he is somewhat confused by how he was impregnated. Then he's got to figure out how to get rid of this devil baby that has come out of him. The devil baby's cute. It's about this tall. He's like, hello! He's got a penis on him about that long. It's really, really funny. But they decide they got to get rid of him. So they go to the Catholic Church to talk to the Catholic priest about what to do. The Catholic priest, well, you've got to perform the holy abortion. The holy abortion. Oh, yes, yes, yes. In order to do this, we've got to have the right things for it. You, Frankie, the goon's sidekick, what is your religion? I'm kind of between religions. I don't really practice religion. You must first find a religion. And when you find that religion, you and the goon must come back here. Come back here and I will perform the ritual in about, say 20 or 30 minutes as he's looking at the little devil baby. Don't take too much time, but definitely come back. It's one of the most perverse things you will ever read. Okay, it is hilarious. Okay, understanding, of course, it's not based on reality. It's based on his own sick sense of humor. But when they actually come to perform the holy abortion, oh my God, it's funny. But yeah, I could not recommend The Goon anymore. Another great comic if you're into it, The Boys. Not quite as funny. It's sort of a superhero comic, but it's got a very realistic take, and it'll make you hate the government and authority. But it's a very good comic. But I highly recommend The Goon. That one issue that has the sparkle pyres in it is really funny. They start talking about St. McFuggin's Day, the day in which all the others around the city will pick up bricks and they will go out into the streets and beat the ugly, beautiful people for having the... They're basically making fun of the attractive vampires, and they're saying that the ugly people will go and take care of them by eating vast quantities of cake and drinking beer until there's nothing else left. He has much better with the words in that one than I'm having on the recall right here. If I'd have read it within the past month, I could get it better. But I highly recommend those. Yeah, you get all sorts of stuff from comics. That's why they tried to ban them in the 1950s. Any other questions? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? Bueller? All right, anything you want to hear about? What time are we at? Yeah, we still got about 15 minutes. Oh, which part? Isn't that in there? Oh, you guys ever read the second one? Oh, there's some stuff in there about what happened with Zaphon. Well, whenever you read through the Bible, they talk about the fall of the angels. They always go on about how, well, Lucifer decided that he was going to be stronger than God, that he could rule the show, and that's how everything happened. Then Lucifer became Satan. Point of fact, Satan's not a name. Satan's a title. Satan is actually derived from a term, Shaitan. Shaitan was actually one of the deities that was worshipped in the same guys, Zoroastrianism, Zoroastrianism. They believed in Ahriman, Shaitan, and Ora Mazda. Those were the main forces there. And I believe Shaitan was a malefic aspect of Ahriman in that concept. But people have confused it, and they now think, oh, Satan's a person, it's a dude. It's like, no, Satan's a title. There are many different entities who have become Satan. When the Iranians were all on it, America's the great Satan, people were like, they called us Satan. No, they said we were the great Satan. We were merely one of many Satans, but we were the greatest one. So actually what they said is you're number one, if you want to look at it from an optimist perspective. Now that story gets funnier if you actually know the history about what happened in the 1950s in Iran, about what we paid people to do over there. But in our story, we start out with God and all the angels, and everything's happy and wonderful and great. The world has been constructed, the universe constructed by Uriel, the great mechanic, in perfect balance and perfect harmony. All of the planets travel in perfect circular orbits around their stars. All of the stars travel around their galactic cores. All the galactic cores travel around the central cosmic core, and all is well. There are no multiverses. There is simply the one place. And God looks down upon it and says, my God, this is boring. Jesus, it's doing everything that I want it to do. There's nothing unique, nothing special, nothing cool. It's exactly what I predicted. Well, this sucks. He's not really digging it. But then he notices, out in the shadows, out in the areas where the light doesn't shine, where shadows are cast on the planet, something is happening. Life forms on those worlds are not living in harmony. They are not sitting together and singing hosannas. Out in those places, gravitation is having a terrible impact on the comets and the asteroids, drawing them out of their circular orbits into the elliptical orbits. And from those elliptical orbits now, taken out of the perfect measures, there are collisions, impacts, where asteroids are now flashing and crashing down onto worlds, kicking up clouds of dust and blocking out the light. Without the light of God, the animals have nothing to sustain them except each other. So they fall upon one another, tearing into each other, ripping apart the flesh, forcing themselves into one another to create more like themselves, to feed on others. And this is the essence of the shadow. The shadow survives when nothing else is there, and it does whatever it has to with the biology that's there. On those worlds, something was different. God saw that and was like, now that is interesting. That is good. By taking that interest in it, he wished to see this spread throughout, to see what his creations would do when posed with an unloving God, with a God that didn't take care of all of them. Would they still cleave to him, or would they run from him? Would they abandon him? He watched as the shadow grew on all these worlds, and eventually he realized that he wanted to speak with this entity. So he took his two greatest sons. He took his son Zaphon and he took his son Lucifer, and he told them, the most powerful of the angels, go out into the world and find this shadow for me. Find it and bring it back for me. Tell me what this shadow is. So they went and they searched the universe. They looked and looked. They went to the worlds where the shadow had fallen. They went where there were the devastated populations of dead animals. They went where the blood had spilled. And there was no evidence of the shadow there. It was, as the name would imply, a shadow. Nothing solid, nothing material. It's always gone. They kept coming back, telling their fathers, there's nothing there, Father. There is nothing there. He's like, no, I know there's something there. That blind spot, that great scotoma from which nothing can be seen. I want you to find this place. Eventually, they grow frustrated. And Lucifer winds up telling him, it's like, it does not exist. There is no such place. Zaphon says, if there is such a place, then it is outside your realm, Father, is where you are not. And God says to them, then go beyond my realm and find this thing for me. So in deep meditation, Zaphon focused, Zaphon thought, and in time he was able to separate himself from his father. And once he was separated from the light, he knew the shadow. The shadow went to him and explained to him, we seek peace, we seek silence, we seek quiet. Go to your father, father of noise. Tell him that we will bring him silence. Tell him that this place is ours. He returns to God, and God sees that his sons have been corrupted. They have been tainted by the shadow that they sought. So he casts them down, casts them out into the world. They go down to his perfect world, and they begin to teach the humans there the things they have learned. And even in that place, the shadow has gained its foothold. You read about it in the early creation myths about the wars that went on there. If you get back to the stories of the Nephilim, the stories of the giants and all that, because that comes into play. Eventually here on earth, the Watchers were sent to protect the humans from the fallen because the fallen were so compelling. When Satan's legions, Lucifer's legions were finally cast down to earth, they ran the place. They had marks on them where God struck them to cast them down. They had these splashes across their face, across their chests, and the humans would imitate these marks, much like the sign upon Cain. That's where tattooing comes from. They were imitating the archangels, the fallen. In time, the fallen angels began to look upon the daughters of man, and they took pleasure from them. And when they took pleasure, they produced offspring, hybrids, creatures with the appetites of mortals, but, well, rather with the tastes of mortals, but the appetites of immortals. They wanted the same thing that biological things wanted. They wanted sex. They wanted glory. They wanted power, but there was never enough. So the Nephilim rose up as giants in the land. And that was why God flooded the place. He was like, wow, I can't do anything with them. All right, bury them. You can't kill them. They're immortals. You destroy their body. There's still an energy force that's left there, the shadow, that which remains. After all that went away, the humans that were left behind, there was, of course, Noach. You guys read the unexpurgated versions of the Bible, the uncut versions, where they talk about Noach being one of the Nephilim, had hair as white as the driven snow and eyes that glowed like the sun, and he had ears like unto God. He could hear God speaking to him, and God said, you guys don't want to drown, you better build a boat. It's going to get real bad here real soon. So Noah's like, oh yeah, we better build a boat. They built the boat up. A few of them survived, but they weren't the only ones. There were other humans that survived, other, if you will, not the pre-Adamics. The pre-Adamics were where the infernals were, but there were other groups out there that were not of that sort, and they are the other tribes that are encountered by Noah's children later on. If you get into the history of it, there's a lot of stories around the Black Sea region that they talk about this, where they talk about the Great Flood. You can actually see the shape of the ark that was used there was a big round one, more traditional Babylonian than the ones. But the myths are there. Oh, they got the site up at Mount Ararat where they say, oh, there's the boat up there. That's Noah's boat. It's like they didn't build boats like that during that time period. The technology didn't exist. There is a shrine up there. There's a monastery up there that looks very much like a boat. The Turks all say, oh, that's Noah's Ark. No, it's probably not. That was actually, there were photographs taken from a U-2 spy plane that flew over that in the 1950s. And that was a big story people used to tell. It's like, yeah, the CIA has pictures of Noah's Ark. It's not Noah's Ark. It's a big monastery that was up there. But that's how the shadow got into it all. The shadow infiltrated, gets into all things biological. So anything alive has a little bit of the shadow in it, because the shadow is, of course, death, the ultimate thing. And that's what Adam got when Adam ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. People go on about, oh, it's the tree of life. No, the tree of life's a different gig. It's the tree of knowledge of good and evil that condemned them. And once they were aware of good and evil, they were aware of the shadow, and that's how the shadow manifests through humanity. But, it's fun stuff when you get into it. I try and pull as much as I can from genuine history and genuine mythology to put it there. Zaphon, of course, was corrupted and was trapped in the furnaces. And that's where we get the fiery concept of hell. Lucifer, he went another way with it. He became the great Satan for a while. Then he abdicated the throne. The throne is taken over by a variety of other deities. And currently within the mythology of the storyline, Asmodeus is the one who is wearing the throne of the great Satan at this point. Now later on, I'm going to blow all your minds by telling you there's no such thing as hell. But that does come to pass in the story. We'll find that out later. That seem somewhat from the shadow? Yeah. Is there anything else? Any other questions? Anything about characters? Anything about storyline, development, cooking tips? All right. I guess that's it then. I appreciate you all coming. I'd like to thank you all very much for coming. I'd like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to come. And I hope that I have provided an entertaining evening for you. I hope I haven't bored you too much.
No.
Cool.
No. Let's give him another round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing all
Certainly.
that.